Hello and welcome to episode 49 of Pulp Today. I have with me here Stephen Robinson. Say hello to the kids, Stephen, and tell them a little bit about yourself.
Hello, everyone. I'm Stephen Robinson. I write for the political blog Wonkette, and then when not dealing with the horrors of the Trump world and MAGA, I write about TV and film for the AV Club and fiction, which is always my kind of favorite thing to do for a Seattle theater called Cafe Nordo.
Now, when you say you write fiction for a Seattle theater, you're writing plays for them, or you're
plays? Yes. So the most recent one we did, which just kind of right under the radar before Omicron, was an adaptation of Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass, sort of with a modern spin, and it went very well. It sold very well. I was very happy. Wonderful cast. It was great to finish it because we were kind of a week before opening in 2020, before everything shut down, and we were able to kind of come back and do it. That's that feeling of kind of COVID did not take everything from us, so it was nice to do that. And somewhat specific to this podcast, I started working with Nordo. We did an adaptation of Maltese Falcon, which was a lot of fun. And Jane Jones, a wonderful Seattle director there at the Wonkette Repertory Theater that was working with Nordo, she had brought me on to do some dramaturg and strip work for it. And she liked that I kind of knew the difference between hard-boiled and film noir, because we were talking, I think, about film noir and how it's like, well, the film Maltese Falcon, which is what everyone thinks of, certainly inspired a lot of what would later become film noir, but there's a hero in it. The whole ending is about he's heroic. It is, and essentially what people like is a hard-boiled. There's a pattern, a rhythm about it that we were sort of able to kind of preserve. Dashiell Hammett is, I mean, I love that book, and
it's a great book.
Unfortunately, we weren't able to keep the Flint Creek monologue for time. It's one of my, it's just one of my favorites. That's one of my favorite lines about vanishing like fingers into a fist.
Yeah,
it's just
vanished like a fist when you open your hand.
Yeah, as
the one that I love the most from the Flitcraft monologue, just because it's so Dashiell Hammett, is his second wife didn't resemble his first wife, but she looked more like her than unlike her, if you know what I'm saying. It's just like, it's such a great, you know exactly what he's talking about. But I actually just rewatched, not that we're going to talk about it, but I just rewatched Maltese Falcon yesterday, because it's months from going anywhere, but I'm doing a Maltese Falcon pastiche in one of my Dynamite comics, and I was kind of surprised that they said yes to it. And I just sort of wanted to look at it and go, what are the plot, like what can I mine from this storytelling wise? And you know, it's funny now, again, it's hard not to get off on that topic because I love it, but I love the Maltese Falcon. I think it's a great movie. All of the women in it are miscast.
It's one of those things.
Sexy book, and he hired 3 matrons to play the 3 sexy women in it. It's like,
it's one of those things of where, and that is what sticks in people's heads. Similarly, one of the challenges with Breakfast at Tiffany's, if you were to ever to do, the movie is very, very different from the book. Audrey Hepburn is not someone you cast as someone pretending to be glamorous, because she's essentially a Jesus original, like literally.
Her 2 most iconic role, it kills me that her 2 most iconic roles are in movies about dirt poor urchins who, can we convince someone that this is a classy, elegant lady? Will it work?
I guess. Maybe, yeah.
It's like, was Lynn Redgrave busy that week? It's just like it's just the funniest thing in the world to me that her 2. It's like if Cary Grant's 2 biggest movies were about, is this guy good looking, or did this homely dude succeed in any way? It's like, what? But yeah, I My Fair Lady, it's like, on what planet does that film take place on? Because it is not recognizably the Earth. And, and yeah, watching Falcon again, I was just again struck by so much of the power of the ending comes from believing that they love each other, and Bogart is able to put it over against all the evidence previously in the movie. I was talking to my wife last night, and I came up with I would have cast Olivia de Havilland.
Ah,
Because when Olivia de Havilland does the schoolgirl innocent act, you go, oh, that poor kid, she's in so much trouble. And then when Bogart laughs at her, you'd go, oh my, did I just get conned? Whereas when Mary Astor lies in The Maltese Falcon, you're like,
yes. Well, she's
lady, seriously?
she lies. She's
I'm supposed to buy, and I love that he calls her out on it constantly and immediately. But it's like, I think it's a better movie if the audience is at least a little bit fooled by Bridget O'Shaughnessy and doesn't spend the whole movie going,
yes.
so,
If he is smarter than we are, it certainly is.
yeah, let him be smarter than we are. I also will always just be amazed that that movie literally changed the definition of a word, because Hammett did the classic writer thing of using a very obscure word that people didn't.
You mean Gunzel?
Yeah. There is no prior meaning of that film. Prior to that film, there is no meaning of that word that means torpedo, gunman, hitman. It just means catamite. It just means young man being used by an older man for sex.
And I remember explaining that during the opening of rehearsal when we're gathered around, and it was of like, oh, right. And then it changed everything in the script of like, oh, this is really, he's really coming down in that relationship. It sort of changed kind of how he regards him, as opposed to just, oh, gunzo means gunman. And you would often see it in
yeah, people,
so many stories. It just
now, depending on what dictionary you find, because it's common usage, it'll now be definition 1, and then definition 2 is, catamite, archaic. But that's the sense in which Hammett was using it, was in the archaic Yiddish Gonsel sense of it. But anyway, I'm fascinated when you can literally change the meaning of a word just by using it in your story, and everyone thinking they're getting the contextual, well, it's got the word gun in it. Obviously it means gunman. It's like, no, it very much does not. But we're here to talk about Patricia Highsmith.
Yes, I love her.
Before we started recording, we were talking about Hitchcock a little bit. She's mostly, remembered by people as the author of some things that got turned into movies. I'm trying to remember. I don't think I've read Strangers on a Train. I think I read Talented Mr. Ripley in college, and that may be the last Highsmith I've read. I looked into her private life. She was a whole mess, that woman.
Oh yes, just I'm a big fan of hers. I've read all of her work. Strangers on a Train, like most people, I came in through the film. I love the movie. I think reading the book, and I was surprised. Oh, this was one that it was a book, and then she had written it, and it's very different. We can get into how later, but it's interesting. I think also Hitchcock might have conned her, where I think he used a different name to get the rights.
Same as
yeah. But I mean, it was her first book, so as as any of us would go, selling your first book for a for a movie is the worst thing that can happen.
And even though I'm obviously on Bloch's side when it comes to Hitchcock cheating him a little bit there, it's undeniable that Bloch got a lot of work and a lot of mileage from the author of Psycho. Like it as much as, yes, he should have been given a lot more money, he did get the hotness off of it, and ended up writing a bunch of movies and doing a bunch of books with as the author of Psycho on it. Yeah, and that whole thing, the one I have no respect for is Joe Stefano, who would really like you to forget that Robert Bloch existed, who wrote the screenplay to Psycho. But all that said, you have a couple of pages you would like to read.
Sure. Let me.
If you want to call them up.
I'll call those up.
Is this like a clip on a talk show? Does this require any setup?
Um, I would say this is sort of famously leading to sort of a famous scene of like in the movies, the crisscross scene of him recommending that he can I can kill your wife
Right.
for you. And we can do strangers, literally strangers. And I think at this point, I'll just read briefly the part where it's been raised, and Guy, who's played by Farley Granger, who was in Rope, another one of my favorite Hitchcock films, at first is just appalled by this. He's met this strange guy on a train, and it reveals his problems with his ex-wife. The other person says, hey, kill your ex, I'll kill your wife, you kill my father, everything goes well. I'll start here. Guy looked at him in disgust. Bruno seemed to be growing indefinite at the edges, as if by some process of delinquence. He seemed only a voice and a spirit now, the spirit of evil. All he despised, Guy thought, Bruno represented. All the things he would not want to be, Bruno was or would become. Want me to dope out a perfect murder of your wife for you? You might want to use it sometimes. Bruno squirmed of self-consciousness under Guy's scrutiny. Guy stood up. I want to take a walk. Bruno slammed his palms together. Hey, cheese, what an idea. We murder for each other, see? I kill your wife and you kill my father. We meet on the train, see? Nobody knows we know each other. Perfect alibis, catch? The wall before his eyes pulsed rhythmically, as if it were about to spring apart. Murder? The word sickened him, terrified him. He wanted to break away from Bruno, get out of the room, but a nightmarish heaviness held him. He tried to steady himself by straightening out the wall, by understanding what Bruno was saying, because he could feel there was logic in it somewhere, like a problem or a puzzle to be solved. Bruno's tobacco-stained hands jumped and trembled on his knees. Airtight alibis, he shrieked. It's the idea of my life. Don't you get it? I could do it sometime when you're out of town, and you could do it when I was out of town. Guy understood. No one could ever possibly find out. It would give me a great pleasure to stop a career like Miriam's and to further a career like yours, Bruno giggled. Don't you agree she ought to be stopped before she ruins a lot of other people? Sit down, Guy. She hasn't ruined me. Guy wanted to remind him, but Bruno gave him no time. I mean, just supposing the setup was that. Could you do it? You could tell me all about where she lived, you know, and I could do the same for you, as good as if you lived there. We could leave fingerprints all over the place, only drive the Dick's batty, he snickered. Months apart, of course, and strictly no communication. Christ, it's a cinch. He stood up and nearly toppled, getting his drink. Then he was saying right in Guy's face with suffocating confidence, you could do it, huh, Guy? Wouldn't be any hitches, I swear. I'd fix everything, I swear, Guy. Guy thrust him away harder than he had intended. Bruno rose resiliently from the window seat. Guy glanced about for the air, but the walls presented an unbroken surface.
Wow. That is great stuff.
Yeah. So much characterization there, so much building, so much of getting in the guy's head of where Guy is going. And I just could ask you of like this setup, as you were saying, how the word guns will change. I feel like this concept I've seen in the 70 years since of switching murders. I think to date myself, I was probably, as we mentioned at DM, I was probably first exposed to it in the film Fro Mama from the Train, just the comedy with Danny DeVito and Billy Crystal. I think Law and Order has done a riff on it. It's something I get. It's such a compelling concept, right? The perfect murder, which goes to a very dark part of ourselves.
Yeah, no, and look, who doesn't stand in, maybe this is just me, who doesn't stand in a bank and look at where the security cameras are and who the guard is, and could I jump over the, you know, just idle speculation, you know, how would a thing be possible? I mean, you know, it's so many murders, you just have to think, you know, don't murder anybody if you're the most logical suspect in the world. You know, like if you're suspect number one. There was a, you know, my dad wrote, among other things, a series of private eye novels. and he passed away about 20 some years ago. But they moved out here before he passed away, and I used to take him to the silent movie theater on Fairfax. Silent movie theater is run by an old gentleman who it was sort of known was having an affair with his much younger male projectionist. He was murdered in what looked like a holdup gone wrong. And my father, who was a month or two away from his own death from heart disease, just like casually said to me, "Oh, it's the projectionist. The projectionist hired the guy. Like that's got like, come on, man. That's the most obvious. The projectionist wants the theater. He's sick of sleeping with the old man."
Yeah.
On the idea that someday the old man's going to die and leave it to him. Maybe he saw a will that doesn't leave it to him, is in the works. Maybe but my dad was like, the projectionist hired an assassin to pretend to be a stick-up man, and that's what happened. And that turned out to be absolutely true. My father cracked the case sitting on his couch reading a newspaper. Don't commit crimes that can be cracked by a guy sitting on a couch reading a newspaper report about the crime.
Oh, exactly. Like, you probably should not do that. I think, yes, the stranger they're trained trope, I think, was also used in one of my favorite Avengers episodes. I think it was the first Diana Rigg ever recorded, where it's a marriage bureau where, so obviously people don't know each other. So it's kind of, you kill this person, you kill. So it's the idea of killing strangers. I think, as Chris Rock would later say, Criminal Minds changed all that, because you would watch, or CSI, you watch stuff like that. It's like, oh, well, they're real thorough. Maybe I'm gonna get caught. Like, I should probably,
right.
But back in the day before people understood DNA, like, oh, you could get away with this, and maybe you could get, is a very satanic concept. And I think the heart of it being the choice, you choose to do a right thing or a wrong thing.
Right.
You and your podcast about Psycho, you'd mentioned that the Gus Van Sant version, which I remember seeing in a theater and being very disappointed. I was like, how bad could this be? I love this movie. It could be cool and fun, right? And no.
Extremely bad.
It's extremely bad. And, you know, they make this choice in a scene of like, oh, even in casting Vince Vaughn, you're already kind of going in the wrong direction, but of where he's pleasuring himself while watching. And it's like, well, if he could do that, then he wouldn't be crazy.
Right.
Like, so you don't
understand. At the very least, he wouldn't need to commit the murder. The whole, I always say that. Know the point of the story you're telling as an artist. It makes me want to like walk up to Gus Van Sant and say, what is this movie about?
Yeah.
Not the plot.
Yeah. What's it about? Yeah.
The plot is it's about a guy who dresses up as his mother and kills people. That's the plot. Why are you telling the story? What is the point of the story? What does the story say about the human condition? The only thing that story says about the human condition is that sexual frustration is dangerous. That's the sexual repression makes people violent and crazy is pretty much all there is to glean from that story, really. I had forgotten watch Psycho again recently too, because it comes up in one of my Elvira comics coming soon. And I had forgotten, what makes Hitchcock great is when we go to Sam Loomis's hardware store, there's a woman asking about pesticide and saying, I want to just exterminate them all. It's a throwaway character. She has nothing to do with the plot. She's asking about insecticide, but it's just a little moment of like someone sounding like a genocidal crazy person in the middle of a murder mystery. And she's talking about her problem with roaches or ants or whatever it is. I don't remember. But that kind of thing to make a movie seem all of a piece, and Hitchcock was great with casting. And sometimes you hear about, like, I feel like I read somewhere once that he wanted Vera Miles to play the Janet Leigh part and it didn't work out. And I'm like, but that doesn't work at all.
No.
Because for me, Vera Miles is disappointing after Janet Leigh. Like, you can't help but be like, oh, I kind of wish it was still Janet Leigh starring in the movie. and the as I said in my podcast, the Julianne Moore Anne Heche thing flips that completely. And oh my God, the acting in the original is so great. But let's talk about the movie version of
Yeah. So the reason I brought that up was am I too forgiving of Hitchcock for the change he made to the book? Because in the book, spoiler alerts for everyone for a 70-year-old piece of work, Hitchcock, it's a thriller, but it has I don't even say happy ending in the sense of Guy does not commit the murder. So Guy actually, his big choice, and he's been pressured after Bruno has killed Guy's ex, he's putting pressure on him to do his side of the bargain. Guy, it looks as if in a classic similar, there's a scene in every Hitchcock film from like The Glass and Suspicion and is what's going to happen here? And it looks like he's going to kill the guy, but he's not. He goes there to warn him, and Bruno has expected that. But from there, it shifts to, can Guy stop from being framed by this bad guy? Can Guy is our hero? He's made the right choice. We should root for him. And it's brilliantly done. It's suspenseful. It has the classic where he needs to stop Bruno, but he has to win a tennis match. Like he has to, so you're suddenly caring about this tennis match on screen. It's like, he has to win. He has to win. Whereas in the book, Highsmith has him commit the murder. He breaks. It's like, okay, well, he's going to go, this is the choice. He makes the bad choice. And of course, from there, it's a tragedy. Everything from there is downhill. It ends with the authorities coming. It's very tragic. Hitchcock flips the script on that and it made me even think, I don't know if your opinion on this, I feel like he doesn't tend to make a lot of films where he doesn't tend to make a lot of tragedies. I think Vertigo is probably the closest to that, but I think generally there's a sense of redemption.
I would put it as he's not a nihilist.
Yes.
Hitchcock is not a nihilist. He knows how sick people are because he himself was sick. And he made movies about it over and over again. It's a fascinating thing to me. Like Hitchcock and Polanski, for all the bad things they did to women, people who do bad things to women are the villains in their films. There is a self-awareness there. The degree to which all of Polanski's films are about rape, and that's his crime, is wild. And considering the crime Polanski committed, Rosemary's Baby is about how someone who a woman should trust to take care of her leaves her in a situation where she's going to be raped.
Oh, yes.
That's what he made a movie about. And Hitchcock makes a lot of movies about creepy weirdos who like to stare at people and who are sexually frustrated and all that kind of thing. But he does understand the audience's need for heroes and villains and resolution. And I think even at his most perverse, he's never that kind of everything sucks and everyone's bad nihilist. And again, I think we're talking about this before we started recording, but I always associate that kind of nihilism. It's the same exact thing as, the Democrats and the Republicans are the same. It lets you off the hook. I can do anything because nothing matters because nobody's good, but so we shouldn't expect good from anyone.
Yes.
That's nonsense. And it's not the way the world is. And we've all seen goodness, and we've all seen, we've all seen good things, bad things happen to good people, and good things happen to bad people.
Yeah, it was the film Don't Look Up had that, where I think the creators were like, oh yeah, well, we're not going to tell you if Meryl Streep's president is a Democrat or Republican, because essentially a both sides thing. And it's like, that's very facile, because there's ways to satirize, you could say, Democratic fecklessness on climate change, and Republican nihilism on climate change, but those are two different characters. To have the same character and say, there's no way to tell, is essentially, well, you don't exist in the world, so the story doesn't, you might as well be setting this in the 50s where the president is president, white guy, good, generic president.
Yeah.
So that's
And
not a
when a
story.
couple of guys who hate Hillary Clinton hire a white woman of a certain age with blonde
Yes.
hair to play the president, and then insist that no, it's supposed to be Trump. It's like,
Really?
yeah, I bet Alec Baldwin would have taken your fucking phone call, dudes. If you wanted to remind people of Donald Trump.
Well, Trump is essentially toxic masculinity and everything. So you can't do Trump without
Well, and that
being
is
a man in white
so,
pants.
this happens to us a lot on Twitter where you say something, I'm like, fucking exactly right. The to say that it's Trump and then say, well, but if that's Trump, so this woman has raped a lot of ladies. She used to run a beauty contest so that she could walk through the dress. Like, you can't take the misogyny out of Trump and say I'm satirizing Trump, because that's part of Trump is the misogyny. So if you create a misogynistic caricature of the first woman president and saying, oh, no, but we're making fun of Donald Trump, that is a fucking fig leaf if ever I have seen
And
one.
her will for ignorance is Palin, and Palin did not succeed because there's a limit to what Americans will accept. I think the nihilism thing you mentioned is great for how I look at this, because I would want to quickly compare this to you read Talented Mr. Ripley, and that's a book. She did a whole series where she a great job of getting you to identify with a psychopath.
Yeah.
And the movie, which again I read first with Matt Damon, the creators distinctly make it a tragedy. Where if you've seen the movie, Damon, there's a character they essentially create who Damon falls in love with. Damon's Ripley, and Ripley has to, again, spoilers for a 25-year-old movie, has to kill him to continue the lie he's living. So it's a tragedy. He doesn't get to walk off in the sunset as his happy psychopath, which is what Highsmith wrote. Right. And one could argue that ending, that's obviously a certain degree much more nihilistic, that a psychopath could get away with everything and walk away.
Right.
It's interesting. I do think there is a sense of audiences sometimes like that, depending upon, if it's a psychopath in a world where everyone else is somehow darker or twisted or something, but it has to be a specific circumstance. So that makes sense, where people are willing to accept the psychopath getting away with everything. I mean, maybe The Godfather, but ultimately the Godfather.
Hannibal Lecter.
Oh yes, that's yeah.
That's the lovable psychopath of all time. And again, and the way that quote unquote franchise has been handled kind of sickens me, because it's like, you can do that in one story, but to keep making him the adorable psychopath on and on again, and I don't care. Same thing with Norman Bates. I don't want to see a movie about his childhood. Don't bore me with a movie about his childhood. We've all had tough childhoods. Not all of us turn into psycho killers. I think it's, like I said, it's too easy to write a world in which everyone's terrible and nothing matters and there is no love and there is no, and also in terms of, speaking of casting, I remember when I saw Talented Mr. Ripley, I was like, so you've got a movie about the world's smoothest manipulative psychopath and the gullible kid that he takes advantage of, falls in love with, and later murders. And you cast Jude Law as the gullible kid and Matt Damon as the master manipulator of people. Like, I don't think that's, I think you might have wanted to switch those two guys. There's a certain something to be said for casting against type. But I don't know that I believe Matt Damon can tie his own shoes in the morning. I don't,
like the idea that Ripley's wealth would be what Jude Law in the mid 90s would have, which is very handsome. He's very charming. And Damon, who's certainly no slouch, there's still the physical resemblance. He's no slouch, but he has the confidence from his wealth and his security that would make him appealing. So having it be both Jude Law with all the wealth and the connections and confidence is everything. And then Matt Damon tends to have less of that. Like, why would Jude Law bring him into his world?
Well, that's the other, that's another that's a casting 101 thing that I see all the time that always bugs me is why does this person care about that person? Why is this, aside from the fact that we need it to happen for the movie to work, I need to be as charmed by this person as the hero, as their mark is, and the con has to work on me. And it
Exactly.
in that case, it absolutely didn't work on me.
Well, I think as a writer, isn't it somewhat humbling, and if you've done plays or whatever, to realize how key casting is. You want to believe,
yeah.
no, my script is so brilliant. This love affair will convey whoever you cast, and we think everyone's been there. It's like no, there's no like. All of it is this audience connection and whether or not you believe. Like otherwise, it's like, oh, I believe that she would.
Yeah, no, the script. The script, the script can be the greatest script in the world. You miscast it, you're making a terrible movie, and there's nothing in directing, editing. I produced a movie a bunch of years ago called True Loved, and had a pretty good script, and we cast an actress named Najara Townsend to play the lead. And I remember saying to her, we actually can't fuck it up because everyone's going to love you. Like, you are such a charming, beautiful kid. She was 15 years old at the time, and it was about a 15-year-old, so that was appropriate. But as like, they're going to be on your side, and we would have to go out of our way to make the audience not interested in what happens to you and what you're doing. It's why television works. Television is, I want these people in my living room every week. And that's it's going back to Ray Bradbury. It's, the family that lives in the wall, that lives on your wall screen, that you pretend that they're actually your family and they feel like they're your family. I think they call that a parasocial relationship now.
Absolutely.
But yeah, you screw up the casting like that, and there's really no coming back from it. And there's sometimes the text says one thing and the casting says something else. And to me, that's the most, you got to change the line. I talked about the line in what I consider the greatest book to screenplay adaptation moment in the history of film is Humphrey Bogart saying, Carmen Sternwood saying to Phil Marlowe, "You're not very tall, are you?" When in the book, it's, "You're very tall, aren't you?" And it's like, yeah, you cast Humphrey Bogart. You can't have someone say to him, "You're very tall."
He is not, no matter how many boxes you put him on.
And in the Maltese Falcon, Effie says, "You're going to want to see her. She's a knockout." And Mary Astor walks in and you go, "She's pretty." Like, I don't know. She's the kind of woman that another woman would call a knockout. Like,
no, I mean,
not there.
And with all respect, you have to believe Miles is, as he says, he's a jerk, but he's not so stupid. It has to be enough. He's like, "Oh yeah, I'll walk in this dark alley with you.
Yeah,
you're so beautiful. You're so."
Yeah, it just it does. There are a million actresses that, and again, Mary Astor is very charming and she's super talented and she's pretty as all get out, but she does not fit.
Yeah.
The movie works in spite of that casting rather than, whereas Sidney Greenstreet in his first movie ever, that's as perfect casting as there has ever been in the time.
You'll never do better. I mean, that's always a challenge of perfect casting. You just need to either find another way into the character or something, but don't. Speaking of Jimmy Stewart, I think what I've read is that Hitchcock had offered Cary Grant both Vertigo and Rope, and for perhaps there's debated reasons of why Grant turned him down on those two. Rope definitely suffers from, I think Cary Grant is someone you would get the idea that those two young men had been idolizing and worshiping and finding, and his sort of glibness about killing, like he would tell his students all this stuff about being superior and killing people, half meaning it, is very Cary Grant. And so that is and less so of Stewart. Whereas I think you need Stewart in Vertigo. That only works if you go in like really liking this guy. And so he's doing things that, okay, wait a minute, you're kind of creeping on your friend's wife. That's not cool. And did you get her undressed? Wait a minute.
But yeah, it's his vulnerability. And Grant had vulnerability too, but of a completely different kind. And again, like, and you have to deal with the fact that Cary Grant didn't think he was handsome and had to be like talked into shit constantly when it dealt with how good looking he was. He didn't like, he didn't realize he was the most charming man in the world. And they constantly had to convince him, no. The audience will actually believe this. Don't worry about it. So there's, that's another element of it. But yeah, casting is everything. And I always, in particular, when someone is presented in a movie as someone super important, and then they're played by, the dollar store version of some movie star, I always hate when they cast someone completely anonymous to play the president of the United States in a movie, because everyone in the world, when someone is president, everyone in the world instantly recognizes a picture of them. When a guy walks into the Oval Office in your movie, and I've never seen his face before, and everyone goes, "Mr. President, the ambassador is here," you go, I would recognize the president. Like, your mind goes, no, that guy can't be the president. I don't know who that guy is. And I always use this example. There was an episode of 24, and I must have been looking away during the opening credits because I didn't see the guest stars. And the premise of the moment is that Kiefer Sutherland is going to see the greatest secret agent who ever lived, the man who taught him everything he knows, the world's master spy. And I think I was watching it with a girlfriend at the time. I think it's long enough ago that it wasn't my wife. And I said, when that chair turns around, I need a James Bond or better. Like, they got to have somebody that lives up to this hype. And it wasn't a James Bond, but it was Peter Weller. And I went, fair.
Yeah.
That's fair.
I buy Peter Weller. Yes.
You gave me a RoboCop. You gave me Buckaroo Banzai. Like, I believe that he's the greatest, but you can't say this guy is the most hyped dude in the world. And it's like, I recognize that guy from his Under 5 on Law and Order. It needs to be the power and weight of the part. I always say that certain characters need to be, they would be the star of their own movie. And that's always going to be true of the president of the United States, for one thing. So when you have a character who would be the star of their own movie, you need a movie star to play that part.
Yeah. And it's just to get someone in, pay them a lot for their cameo, their time, and it works. It's either Robert Redford. There's usually, like, here's your list of presidents of a generation, especially if it works, if they've been in movies before. So he comes in with that.
And the Robert Redford thing, I also love casting that transmits to a certain audience. And it's me, I'm that audience, that we know what we're doing and we know what genre we're working in. Putting Robert Redford in Winter Soldier is just such a funny, like, it's a 1970s political thriller. Here's Robert Redford.
I love that casting.
Literally, it had to be him or Warren Beatty to make that part work.
I supported his casting, and Indecent Proposal. People were like, no, it doesn't work, it needs to be like gross Danny DeVito at his grossest or something. And it's like, but then it's a different and it's
not about jealousy, then it's just about ew, gross. Then it's that episode of The Simpsons where it's John Lovitz.
Exactly.
Is the guy, right? It was Lovitz playing.
John Lovitz playing off of that. But
the other one that was a really beautiful acknowledgement of what had gone before. And also great actor that, wasn't working as much as he should. Robert Morse being the boss in Mad Men.
Oh yeah.
Was such a, yes, this is how to succeed in business without really trying, as presented by Harold Pinter. Like, but we got the leading man from How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying. And he brings that energy, that 90, like, you look at him and you remember him from being in the corporate world, the sexist corporate world of the 1950s and all that. But it's such a hat tip to, we know what this is, and we know what we're doing, and we're not pretending we're the first people to make a movie about this or to make a television show about this.
Yeah, I think of Highsmith's books, Better Cat. I mean, there was one of the later ones they did with John Malkovich
Yeah,
playing
Malkovich played the part.
middle-aged Ripley's Game, which I enjoyed because Malkovich is just
He's
a
definitely more
presence.
believable as a master manipulator of people, as a genius. You know, it's he definitely brings that power to the performance. But yeah, I was fascinated to read about Highsmith's personal life. I had completely forgotten that she writes Carol,
Mhm.
which is sort of her literary not coming out, but then eventually it does, it does come out. And it's funny that all of her mystery stories mostly have unhappy endings, or at least happy endings, but for the psychopath.
Mhm.
But famously, Carol is like the first homosexual romance that doesn't end with people committing suicide or dying or
Oh yeah,
thrown in an asylum, or it's funny that that's what she wanted a happy outcome in.
yeah. I think it's a pleasant surprise given, I'm not saying I wouldn't label her a nihilist. It's hard. I think it's not just, I think she just presents these choices and people make bad choices, which is sort of different from kind of, and I can sometimes bash Woody Allen on this, but as someone who kind of grew up this, it's like, um, here's how clever it is to say that people are bad, which is
Right.
not in itself, it's not coming from character, it's just
Yeah.
and this person, I would never be shocked by this choice. I mean, he had twice made movies where um, a guy, a well-off person, has his mistress killed and gets away with it. And we're
Mhm.
like, okay, well, this might be a thing with you now at this point, where it just seems like you just want to hurt women who no longer
Well, and that, I
serve your
used to I
purpose.
used to love Crimes and Misdemeanors when I thought that the Woody Allen character was Woody Allen in that movie. It's when I realized that no, the Martin Landau character is Woody
Yes.
Allen that I found the movie too hard to watch now,
Oh,
because
yeah, exactly. It's
like, he knows all about getting away with it and going on to continue to be a millionaire and be beloved by
yeah,
people.
life is wonderful, and it doesn't. It's like, well, what are you telling me? So I think as we said of like some of these thrillers and with Hitchcock, I've been sort of inspired by the sense of, I feel like their ability to use character, to have the characters make choices that really matter. I mean, again, as a company, people might consider Manhattan, for instance, a more sophisticated movie than some of Hitchcock, because Hitchcock was considered very mainstream entertainment. But it's like, well, no one makes a choice that doesn't shock me or is means anything really for character. It's just, these are just plot choices. Whereas, oh my God, Jimmy, what are you doing? Why are you changing this woman and
Right.
making her dress like a dead woman? Why? Okay, oh, Janet Leigh, why are you
Yeah.
stealing?
Well, I mean, I will argue till the end of time about the value of genre in being truly, what's the word, revealing of human character.
Absolutely.
I think the idea that there's a wrong, that uh, I think if you think a movie about a guy in tights and a cape can't say something profound about the human condition by its very nature, you have revealed your weaknesses as a writer, not the weaknesses of the genre. Anything in 96, I was hired to write and direct a low budget movie called Kick of Death. There were not a lot, aside from the fact that it had to be an action slash martial arts movie. I was not given a lot of parameters. One of the parameters was that the main character had to be a kickboxer and his girlfriend had to be a stripper. And I had a moment of like, ugh. And then the writer in me, the real writer, went, they're human beings. There aren't valid stories to tell about kickboxers who are going out with strippers. Really? That's a shitty fucking way of looking at the world. And it's also completely inaccurate. And, uh, there are things you can get from the pulpiest of material that the most sensitively written, adult quote unquote novel will not deliver for
Oh,
you,
yeah.
because it is, it there's a reason we love metaphors. There's a reason we've been doing stories about gods and monsters since the
Oh,
dawn
yeah.
of time.
And it goes back to Shakespeare, right? Like something in the theater community, both in Portland, Seattle, there'll often be a sort of this woe is me sense of people don't want to see my, you know, Black kid got shot play. Why do Black audiences not come to the Black kid got shot play that's relentlessly depressing, instead went to see Black Panther or Spider-Man Far From Home or these films? And it's like, well, okay, but I mean, what is Romeo and Juliet? What is
Right.
Hamlet? Like Hamlet is one of the greatest pieces, but it's essentially, it hits certain notes that you are more likely to see in a modern, in a well done superhero movie. Like it's grand and epic, and there's sword fights in Romeo
And
and
a
Juliet.
ghost.
Exactly, there's ghosts and there's
Yeah.
comic relief, and to me, it's like we need to be doing more of Shakespeare and more of these things where these grand sense, grand characters, and genre definitely does that as well. You have potential for to me, it's like I want to write Sidney Greenstreet characters. Like those are like
Mhm.
in Gutman. It's just
Yeah.
wonderful. That's so much
It's so
fun.
hard to imagine, of all of the casting in the history of mankind, it is so hard to imagine another actor saying those lines.
Yeah.
The way Hammett writes that character is so weird and interesting. The repetition of phrases, the like, as to that, sir, as to that.
Mhm.
It's so fascinating and odd, and he gets it exactly right. Like,
Oh yeah.
it's a hard, I can imagine even Orson Welles would have been like, I don't know how to say anything.
No. My friend Aaron played him and did a great job. And I think sometimes people will try to run away from a definitive performance. And I think the tougher thing is to be like, yeah, this guy got it right. I'm not gonna do an SNL parody of it, but I
Right.
need to go in and be aware. I'm not gonna try to deliberately make choices
Yeah.
differently because they might be the bad choice. I mean, he
Right.
made.
Well, it's funny. One of my favorite movies of all time is The Producers, the original. And I saw Jason Alexander do the musical here in LA. And then I saw the movie version of the musical. And one of the things I was super curious about is talk about a definitive performance and dialogue written to be delivered by a particular actor in a particular style. And Jason Alexander, not always successfully, but he definitely did. I am going to find a different way to make every single one of these lines funny than the way Zero Mostel did it. I'm going to find a different direction. I'm going to go in that direction, and I'm going to read every line in that direction. And it,
Oh yeah.
in the terms of a hermetically sealed universe of that movie, of that show, it was great. It was fine. I've seen the original so often, I'm distracted by everything that's different. And then I saw the movie and I'm like, oh, so what's his name? Nathan Lane, totally comfortable just doing a Zero Mostel impression for 3 hours. Like, not a problem. I did Funny Thing Happened. I did Fiddler on the Roof. I can do this exactly the same. I'm just gonna phone in that Zero Mostel performance. It's gonna be great. I'm gonna read the lines exactly the way he read them, and no one will care. And and those are two very different approaches. But I can't necessarily handed Nathan Lane's part. I don't know that I would have sat there and gone, I presume to be smarter than Zero Mostel and how I'm going to play these lines. Like that's a hard.
Alexander had the benefit of, I mean, yeah, George Costanza is someone who gets in over his head and is essentially a con artist, but a failed con artist. So certainly the audience will be like, oh yeah, I get the Georgeness of this.
It wasn't,
and he wasn't as like doing that either, right?
Yeah. I mean, it was also, I think I want to say it was Martin Short as in the Gene Wilder part. And just like Matthew Broderick, you go, these guys are 30 years too old to play these parts. The whole point is that he's a young man and naive and all that. When you bring out some 50-year-old dude, I don't care how, tousled his hair is. if that's an old guy, this is a very sad show.
Yes, exactly. Like, are
Only
you?
a little sad, but like if you take away the element of his youth,
Yeah, you have to do it as a midlife crisis.
yeah, then it's a completely different. It's like, I know we've talked about casting a lot. It's like Harrison Ford in Sabrina. It's like, no, the original story is not about how old Linus is. It's that he's not William Holden.
Yeah.
Humphrey Bogart was magnetic and sexy as hell, but he was a homely man. Mm-hmm. And it's not about a guy who's been the most handsome man in the world his entire life, and now he's 62 and he's in love with a 25-year-old. Like that isn't the problem in that.
That's story. A different story and a very depressing one.
The problem is that his younger brother is gorgeous and charming, and he is neither of those things. And it's like, that ain't Harrison Ford, guys. Like, that is not, Giamatti wasn't a thing yet to play that part. But that's a Paul Giamatti part, not a Harrison Ford part.
Exactly, because at that point, wasn't Greg Kinnear starting to of like always the person someone is the wrong guy who's always like, oh well, he's not going to get the girl.
But yeah, that was
you're in a film with Tom Hanks.
when they announced that casting of Harrison Ford, I said, who's playing Harrison Ford's better looking younger brother? I'm really like, who have you got lined? Dennis Quaid? Like, I don't know. Who have you got lined up to, like, even that wouldn't work. But I'm like, who?
Well, Greg Kinnear was just the empty suit version of that character without the charm. And and I'm not a casting whiz, but I would just be like, okay, well, if I were making Indiana Jones or Star Wars right now,
who's the guy?
Who would I cast as that guy? And that guy would make sense as a younger, and then I can put some glasses, whatever Harrison Ford did, try to make himself look serious and mature. He did a lot of that in his 50s, but he was like still like, I mean, you're really still Harrison Ford. You're
No, it is an interesting thing with his career. I always wonder if Mosquito Coast had made a lot of money and won Best Picture and gotten him an Oscar, there's a whole different career for Harrison Ford from that. Because I feel like that not being acknowledged as a great movie was where he went, you know what, I'll just go back to punching people in movies, and that'll be it. Like, I'm just gonna hit dudes now because nobody wanted to.
It worked for him. I'll play the president, action hero president. And
But what was I gonna say? It's interesting that no one has yet done Mr. Ripley. Like, that's the most obvious streaming series in the world, and I'm surprised that it hasn't. It's got everything people love: a psychopathic main character. I have to say, that's one of those, the David Fincher of it all. I'm just always like, how do you want to spend your entire life telling that story? I'm depressed just watching your television shows and your movies. How is that all you want to do ever, 24 hours a day, day in, day out? I don't.
Yes, it's a tough, I mean, I think there's a sense of often who is the worst person. I think even Highsmith in later films, you could argue, goes in I wouldn't call it Norrish way, but in a sense of like with Kiss Me Deadly, the idea is that we like Mike Hammer is a complete jerk, lunatic, and Kiss Me Deadly, but everyone else in that world is worse.
Right.
Like, you're evil. He's almost at least recognizably human. Like, his flaws are human. So you could put Ripley in that kind of world, but I mean, even Hammer had like his assistant who he liked. There's like there's no humanity in Ripley, so that makes it very hard to get a clink to him. And I think it works. I mean, her challenge at Mr. Ripley, I think, does the trick of enjoying watching this guy get away with essentially murder, like, and killing people who did not deserve to be killed. Not that people deserve to be killed, obviously, but in the sense of
those kind of stories, there are definitely, justified and unjustified deaths. But no, it's a fascinating worldview, and there's definitely some misanthropy in Highsmith's work, it seems like. And it's a different kind of misanthropy in Hitchcock's work. I think there's a little more I think there's a little self-hatred in both of them. But again, you come down to Strangers on a Train. It's like, there's a reason it's Farley Granger and not Cary Grant.
Yeah.
It can't be a strong, you'd never believe Cary Grant was going to kill his wife.
Yeah.
You know? I mean, it's different. He did movies like that, but it's not in that. You put him next to, I'm spacing on the actor's first name, Walker, who plays
Robert
Bruno.
Walker. Yeah.
Robert Walker, who plays Bruno. As I said in DMT, Charlie X's dad. You know, like, you need someone who appears at least a little weak and possibly dominated by him. And there are a lot of actors who wouldn't appear weak or dominated by Robert Walker.
You have to believe the choice they're going to make, what they're going to do. Obviously, Granger, in a sense, that I do think there's a sense of memory people have in past roles. Granger had played a more submissive and rope to, you know, someone like Walker. And so, okay, maybe we're going in this direction, we'll buy it. And obviously the book, he makes that sort of choice. But yeah, I think ultimately Hitchcock was very good about finding that clear choice, building so the suspense is about the choices. Rewatching North by Northwest recently, which is an epic, which is great.
Yeah, it's a masterpiece.
There's no dumb choices. Cary Grant doesn't make any dumb choices. Like, well, why don't you just go to the police, or why don't you do this? It's like, there's no idiot plotting, and he just doesn't do idiot plotting, I think, in any of his films. I really respect that. Like,
yeah,
makes sense.
Yeah. No, even if Grant makes mistakes, it's, you know, almost always because he doesn't have the complete picture and he's stumbling around in the dark and he's trying to figure out what the right move is. No, that movie's a template for any entertainment of that kind, for any spy movie. You know, people have said it's, you know, it's the crypto first James Bond movie. It's sort of the, you know.
Absolutely. But I've always admired his ability in that, because once someone is once you've thrown him out of his element, it's an entirely different given circumstance. So who is this person? So he very quickly establishes who Grant's character, who Thornhill is, just in his relation to his secretary in that very brief scene. So then we can contrast that against everything else. It's just, his structures are always, as a writer, that's been like, it's been sort of the inspiration to me. I know my next project, I was talking to an actor I've worked with recently, and she's a big Hitchcock fan. We're trying to think of a sort of Hitchcock style sort of thriller to do in a space. And I always tell people, it's like, oh, so it's going to be, no, not a parody, not a parody of the form or like riffing on it, because I respect the form. I really love building of suspense, of character, having an audience truly engaged, especially now we're in the middle of this pandemic, when we can bring audiences back, just having a space where everyone's together, like, what's happening, what's going to happen, and to be invested. Not as you were saying about slasher films, where people are kind of like, oh yeah, okay, here's a dumb, she gets killed, ha ha ha, here's a joke, and like not care. It to be really like on your sense of like, no, don't do that. Oh no, don't make that phone call because that person's doing this. Like, to really be invested is wonderful. It's what we've missed. And I think that's what we're seeing about when people are coming back to theaters. I do think that's one of the reasons they're coming. I mean, when you can choose to stay at home and stream, it's because this isn't a collective experience where we're all holding our breath together or laughing together, no matter how good the work could be. If it's just something I can watch at home safely, why would I?
It definitely, I went to see Nightmare Theater in a largely empty, or Nightmare Alley in a largely empty movie theater last night. And I was glad I saw it, because I turned to my wife and said, honestly, the kind of thing this is, I might have checked out of it on television. I might have looked at my phone. There are certain movies, and really the best movies create a kind of trance. The best art, the best theater, the best books create a kind of trance that you accept what you're being told, you're invested in the people,
Mhm.
and you have to see how it turns out. We were flipping channels yesterday, and I think we put on movies sometimes when we're both puttering and doing stuff, and we put on Light in the Piazza, Potboiler from the 60s, a melodrama. And I think we came in about 15 minutes and we ended up watching the whole damn thing because we got invested in the story. And my wife was like, stupid melodramas. Now I can't stop watching this thing until I find out if George Hamilton ends up with Yvette Mimieux. Like, it's the least important, least pressing matter in the entire world if George Hamilton and Yvette Mimieux end up together in the 1960s. But for the next hour, we're going to find out the answer to that question. Will Rossano Brazzi star with Olivia de Havilland? That's really the important thing.
Care about the characters, and then you can kind of then care about the story. Everyone's talking about Don't Look Up and those stories. And I think that is one of the sometimes satire where you don't necessarily, everyone's absurd and crazy. I mean, I liked Strangelove, certainly. I think a lot of people do, but I do think right now, sometimes earnestness, coming off what I call the Twilight Zone holiday, January 1st, where I feel like what everyone sometimes misses when doing, versions of Twilight Zone, is Sterling's earnestness, and definitely someone who's not a nihilist, not a really
solid, not at all.
And that is also something I've always inspired me, the idea of how he's able to tell these grand stories in this sort of genre setting, but through earnestness and through of
and he's not, as you say, he absolutely believes in people, and he believes in redemption, and he believes in the human spirit, and he also believes in all the things that crush that. And that's what he made. Get back to Strangelove. There's one earnest character in Strangelove, and he's the hero of the film. And even though it's a comic part played comically, we never look down on Group Captain Lionel Mandrake for his perception of what's going on, for what he's trying to accomplish. And the movie wouldn't work without one sane man going, you're seriously talking to me about the Coca-Cola company when I need a quarter to call the president to end World War III? Like, what's going to happen to you, your entire Freymouth way of looking at things. It's an amazing part, and it's got great humanity. The whole movie is it's ultimately too tragic without it. And admittedly, it ends the way it ends. But it's you can't. It's like, going back to Woody Allen, when he started making serious films and he makes interiors which doesn't even have a smile in it. Even Ingmar Bergman knew there is no such human experience where there's not even one smile. That's just as bullshit as anything else.
Well, I mean, as I've often said, now I would say Scorsese is affirmatively a funnier filmmaker than Woody Allen, perhaps because he understands that. So aside from After Hours, Goodfellas, like of my generation, good people who quote Goodfellas and took up jokes on it, and there's legitimately humor in that is far different from any. I mean, we don't connect, because a friend of mine liked to say a joke sometimes it's not a reference, which is a lot of Allen's challenges, which is like, okay, well, that's a clever Dennis Miller style reference to something you read, but like here, like, oh, this is true character driven comedy, even though it's about murderers and gangsters, and like that's what makes them relatable and humor. I mean, even Coppola did that. Even The Godfather had humor in it.
There's a lot of funny stuff in The Godfather, because again, it's like they're human beings. Everyone in that story is a human being. And human beings are funny, and they're sad, and they're more than just the one thing. And just, thinking that making a movie in which nobody smiles makes you Ingmar Bergman is one of the most complete tangent, but one of the most fascinating things to me is that I love Federico Fellini, and so does Woody Allen, and he doesn't understand he doesn't embody any of the values of Federico Fellini in any of his films.
No.
And that is that is what the end of 8.5, spoiler alert, is our selfish, self-centered main character who's been trying to plumb the depths of his own humanity for 2.5 hours, decides that the only way to survive and go on with his life is to embrace all of the people who make his life difficult and easy, who love him and hate, like to embrace life. That's the end of 8.5. Woody Allen remakes it as Stardust Memories. That movie ends with an audience of people who are all the people in the movie, just like in Fellini, walking out of the theater talking about the movie. And when they're all gone, Woody Allen walks in alone, looks at the empty screen, and walks out. And I was like,
he's not with the people, he's not engaged with.
You spend all this time and some studio's money remaking 8.5, and you don't know the first fucking thing about it. You don't know what it's about. You don't know. I mean, or you know what it's about, and it's just, that ain't me. I'm remaking one of the great humanist films by rejecting humans.
No, yeah, it is
It's like,
essentially, it's what you were kind of saying about Spielberg with the not like, oh, and the huge hook noses or whatever. So getting the superficial aspect of how Fellini told his story, but not getting that it's essentially the humanity there. Which again, that's, I mean, some of my favorite works, they're humanists. Like again, Serling, even Hitchcock in certain ways, because the hero, you want to believe, like that's, people want to believe they can be better than they are. And tough situations, I'm going to do this. I don't necessarily want to watch a movie, why is that clever? Of like, oh, yeah, at my worst day, I would have done this.
Right.
Thank you, Woody. As opposed to at my worst day, I would actually, you know, if David Evelyn, if I suddenly someone gets murdered and I'm framed for it, here's how I would rise up as me. I want to believe that. I want to go on that journey and believe that here's how I can outwit James Mason, who doesn't want to. Who doesn't want to do that?
There are a lot of ways to do that. I mean, I'm not a giant Matrix fan, but one of my favorite things in the first movie is when Fishburne tells him, no, in order to escape, you got to go out on this ledge and walk along the outside of this building. And he just tries it and goes, no, I'm not a climbing around on the outside of skyscrapers guy. I'm a fucking coder who works for a big faceless corporation. And you're asking me to do action hero nonsense. And no, I'm not going to do it. I can't do it. If you'd done it, you in the audience would go, would you really?
No. And it means something later that when he does something unbelievable
around the outside of a skyscraper, really, you'd do that on the 20th?
And there are films that would do that, right? That would sort of immediately throw the accountant into this drastic world. So here it's like it takes him a while to get there. So it matters when he does do it. It's because my friend Lawrence Fishburne's in trouble. I'm going to believe in myself only because I want to save my friend.
You show them, and you would show the fear of that. I did a web series years ago where I had a scene in which the main character, who is not an action hero, gets in the middle of a fight between two secret agents, and another guy's a kind of assassin robot. And one of the assassin robot knocks the gun out of the one of the agent's hands, and my hero picks it up, points it at the bad guy, and pulls the trigger, and nothing happens. And at the end of the scene, the agent takes the gun out of hand and says, here's where the safety is. Cock it first before you fire it. Should that come up again? Because one of the things that kills me in movies is, you know, people pick up a discarded machine gun and fire it with amazing accuracy.
They know how to use it and don't get
they don't pull back the slide. They don't do any of the things you need to do to make a machine gun ready for firing that the average person might not be trained on or know about. And I thought it would be funny to just do a scene where someone in an action movie picks up a gun and has no idea how to use a gun because they've never used it because it hasn't come up.
Yeah.
You know, I like to think I would remember to look and see if the safety was on. If a gun ended up at my feet, you know, for one reason or another. But I'm in the heat of the moment. You might not go, oh yeah, no, this is good. Clips full, great. You know, like
I'm ready to be a badass.
Yeah, but it's you know, and there's a certain degree of suspension of disbelief. That's fine, but I always think I always say as a writer, research is everything. And it's not that you're writing, you're creating a fake world. Verisimilitude is not everything. But at a certain point, like when The Walking Dead shows that everyone in the world who has survived somehow can make a successful headshot against a zombie while both of them are moving with a handgun from 20 feet away. I'm like, cops can't do that now. like, just can't you choreograph one of these scenes so that somebody misses once? But in every action scene in Walking Dead, at least until I stopped watching it, every single time anyone, be they a 5-year-old to a 7-year-old woman, is being attacked by a zombie, they have a handgun, they turn right here.
Kill shot's very hard.
Kill shot right between the eyes on someone moving while they themselves are also moving, not standing still in a gun range, but just like, and I'm like, just
you would make a lot of
miss every 10th round. Just,
well, there's the trope of truth in television, is for the TV tropes has that of like, because people make fun of stormtroopers for bad aim, and it's like, well, some of that's really bad, but at the same time, it is hard to hit moving targets. Like, it is possible that people running while you're shooting, you are going to get the thing of where the bullets, and you don't actually get someone in time for them to dart around the corner. It is possible, certainly less so than people just like
and I've certainly seen I think, again, it's a fine line. I was flipping channels and I think Casino Royale was on, and there was some scene where Bond was running and someone was firing a machine gun at him. But he was running through an area with a bunch of stone columns. And I was like, conceivably, he's moving fast enough and the guy isn't leading him right, and all of his bullets are ending up in the stone columns and blah, 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 blah. But give me something, instead of just like flat plain. I mean, in Star Wars, for example, I can't think of a lot of situations in those movies where the stormtroopers just have absolutely dead ass clear shots that they could make and kill everybody. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's not, as you said, it's usually running down corridors with turns in them and things are happening and doors are closing and all that. But like I said, just give me just enough to hang on to so that I can believe in the reality of what I'm seeing. And if it's just over and over again, they just all missed for some reason.
It doesn't matter that there's no tension. So everything's about how do I escalate stakes? How do I make in every scene that you believe the person's life is at risk or at threat, and Hitchcock was a master of that, of like, oh my goodness, is he going to be revealed?
People have to believe there is no way out of this. They're like, wow, how would that, it's, everyone talks about what a terrible movie it is, but one of the great moments in any James Bond movie is him being thrown out of the plane in Moonraker, because you literally go, how the fuck how is just got thrown out of a plane?
That's it.
And the skydiving technique makes his saving himself believable. The speeding up and dropping and jumping on the guy with the parachute. Like, the fact that scene isn't laughably ridiculous. I mean, it is at the end with the falling on the circus tent, but that's one of my favorite scenes in any Bond movie, because you're just like, you have created a situation where the audience can't easily think, oh, I know how he's going to do this. He got the gadget from Q. Sure, I know how he's going to do this. You just seeing that in a movie theater in 79, 80, I was just like, okay, you got me. I have no idea how James Bond gets out of being thrown out of an airplane without a parachute. There's no Deus Ex Machina here. There's no, and that's kind of, I always say it's one of the holy grails of writing action, to write an action sequence that no one's ever seen before, that is believable and that you can't predict the outcome of it. And you don't beat it by Deus Ex Machina, and you don't beat it by like, oh, well, Q in the first scene gave him a thing that's weirdly, coincidentally, the exact thing he needs in this one situation. And that's I think anyone who writes that kind of material, you're always looking for the like, what's the thing I've never seen before? That's scary and interesting, and yet in some ways also like, who isn't afraid of falling from great heights? That's not an exotic fear. We can all identify with, okay, I would lose my shit. And the difference between me and James Bond is the guy who goes, well, if I hold my arms against my sides, I can drop faster and I have a shot at getting that guy's parachute off him, instead of the rest of us who would just be going, I'm gonna die. So that's another, just not to get into the writing 101 of it all, but I think a lot of people don't think about, when they're writing genre, what makes someone a hero is choices, is making the difficult choice. My favorite moment in Raiders of the Lost Ark is him swimming to the submarine, because it's nuts, because it's suicidally, but it is he has no other option. Like, his other option is to stay on the ship and they get to port and he radios for a destroyer. Like, I don't know how he solves that problem. But in the moment he goes, well, I guess I'm swimming to the fucking Nazi submarine and we'll figure out from there what the next move is. That's the most heroic thing he does in the movie. Of all of the other things, he does a lot of heroic things in the movie, but that's the most batshit. I am going to swim to a U-boat and hope that a plan fucking presents itself that allows me to beat this thing and save Marion and get the Ark. And yeah, so that's we've hit 1,000 different topics, and I'm always happy when that happens. I should let you know.
Oh, good.
That's whenever I've done podcasts, this one and the writer's block, I'm always like, the point is to have an interesting conversation, and it does not, on topic is an extremely overrated,
absolutely
an overrated thing. So thank you so much for coming on, Stephen. Where can people find you on the interwebs?
I am on Twitter, SER1897. And I am, you can find my work at wonkette.com and the AV Club. And if you're in Seattle, come see something at Cafe Nordo. Even if I haven't written it, they do great work. So
what is Cafe Nordo an under 100? Is it equity? What kind of?
We've used equity. They're under 100. When we actually did 2 shows simultaneously, which sounds crazy. When we opened to keep the space, it's an immersive theater, so they actually serve great food during the show, and which combines the 2 things I love, which is a great meal and theater. But yeah, like there was like usually capacity around 50 people. This time it was like 25, and upstairs and downstairs. So coming up about the same, but trying to use different spaces to be cautious. And it certainly worked. There was no issues during our run and everything. But yes, it's in Seattle's Pioneer Square. And yeah, we do a lot of fun work there. So hopefully in the new year, once we get, let's hope through Omicron, maybe we hunker down in January and things will improve. So, but thank you so much, David.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for coming on, Stephen. I'm really glad we got a chance to talk.
Hey, great.